Hi, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this fourth day of SINFO. And now to start the keynotes for this afternoon, we have with us Andreas Ojerfors. Andreas is a lead designer at MachineGames, and he's going to be presenting about creating worlds with grit, wit, and tech. Andreas, good luck, and the floor is yours.
Okay, let's get started then. It's great to be here. It's interesting to try to do this remotely. Seems to be working out so far. Let's see. This is me. My name is Andreas Ojerfors. I'm a game designer. I'm currently the lead designer at MachineGames, a studio in Sweden. It's the studio that brought back the Wolfenstein game series. Started working there in 2010. I'm a Swede. I live in the city of Uppsala in Sweden, and I've been doing this for quite some time now. I started making games back in 2004 in Norway. And before I started making games, I was writing about games for a couple of years as a games journalist. All I want to do in this presentation or this talk is to talk a little bit about what it means to be a game designer. And I want to talk about the tools I have been using as a game designer. And I'm going to talk about creating worlds. And to do this, I'm going to use a few of the game designer roles that I've had throughout the journey of my career so far. And in terms of creating worlds, for me, making games have always been about creating worlds. Everyone, of course, have their own motivations why they want to make games. But for me, it's about creating worlds. And that might sound a little bit pretentious, perhaps, but it's not. It's actually quite simple. This is all I mean. I'm talking about creating spaces and stories for an audience to be immersed in and to engage with. This can be done in a number of ways, right? You can do it through video games, you can make movies, write literature, work in theater, or you can simply make stuff up in your own mind. That's also creating worlds. Before we start looking at the game design roles that I've had, I want to jump some years back, a couple of years back before I started making games. Living in my hometown of Karlstad in Sweden, I spent a couple of nights each week helping out a local theater, working as a spotlight operator on a musical called From a Jack to a King. So what did that mean? Well, it meant that I operated the spotlight. I mean, quite physically, just controlling it with my hands. And doing that, I controlled, which actors that were lit on stage, when they were lit, how much they were lit. So what does that have to do with creating worlds? Well, in a way, I felt that I was creating worlds as a spotlight operator. Describing the role of a spotlight operator makes it seem, simple, and you could almost say that I wasn't much more than just a cog in the machine in the theater. But even so, it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had up until that point, because every night I was doing it, I really felt how I was contributing to shaping the experience the audience had. And I was doing that by, focusing audience attention and affecting their mood by simply operating the spotlight according to the direction of the director. So one of the things I learned from doing that was to feel like you are creating an experience for an audience, or creating worlds. You don't have to be the director. You don't have to be the star on stage. You can be something as simple as a spotlight operator. So that's something I've taken with me. I feel for all of the design jobs I've had, no matter how much of an influence I've had on the game, I've always felt like I'm participating in creating a world that players will be able to step into. My first job making video games was in Norway, in Oslo, for the studio Funcom, and I worked on Age of Conan Hyborian Adventures, which was a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. And I joined as a quest designer. So let's talk about what that means. But before we do that, I want to show you a trailer. And this trailer was actually done a few years after after the game was released. I just kind of like this trailer. It was done for when the game went free to play. So let's have a quick look at that.
Years ago, online gamers were introduced to the violent world of Conan the Barbarian. A sexy, savage, and brutal world. And now, the gates to the world of Hyboria have been forever unchained. Age of Conan, free and unchained.
Okay, that's the game. So what did I do as a quest designer? Well, my job was simply to design and implement the quests of the game. I was one out of quite a few quest designers. And that meant that, I was telling stories. I was a storyteller, telling the background story of the location and areas of the game, the different characters in the game world. And I wrote stories that the player would take part in. And that often happened in the game by you talking to a character. The character needs help with something, and he sends you on a quest. So you go out into the world to do this quest, some sort of gameplay challenge, and then at the end there's probably going to be a reward for you. So in one sense, you could say that as a quest designer, I curated a journey, or rather many journeys, through the content of the game. I was a guide for the player, helping them get through the game, understand what to do and when. So this was always in cooperation with other types of designers. So one other type of designer that I worked with was the world designer. And the world designer on Age of Conan, in a different time and at a different studio, they might have been called a level designer. They were simply the people who built the world, built all the mountains and the valleys and the hills and the villages and the cities. I also worked with the gameplay designers, and the gameplay designer on Conan was the person who implemented combat. They placed the AI, created camps, they placed treasures to be found or huts to be burned down. So kind of the interactive elements, the actual content that you play against. That was the gameplay designers. So those three roles work together to kind of build the world of Conan. And doing this, we used Funcom's own engine. So they had a game engine that had been built at the beginning. It was built for the previous MMO Funcom had done, which was Anarchy Online. So we already had a lot of great tech and a lot of tools as we started working on Age of Conan. And Age of Conan actually had really great tools. So there are a few things you want from tools, I'd say. One is simply the fact that you want to have tools that produce content that is system driven to quite a large degree. What you want to avoid doing is handcrafting every piece of the game. You don't want to script everything because every time you do a unique solution for anything in a game, it's likely that that's going to break. So rather, what we did was a lot of our content was kind of based on the same systems. And as long as we could keep those systems healthy and stable, we had a stable game. So that meant that we could do hundreds and hundreds of quests without all of them breaking all the time during development. Because if that happens, it's going to slow you down a lot. You want to spend more time on actually making content rather than trying to fix content you already worked on. Another thing that I think the tools provided by the game engine did really well was it helped us with iterating on the content. One could say that the quality of a game is, at least to some degree, reliant on the iteration time of the environment, of the game engine and the tools. You design something and you implement it and you test it, and almost always there's going to be something that is pretty off with what you just implemented. So what you do then is you return to it and you fix the problems that you found, and then you test it again. So implementing and testing, that's one iteration, right? So what you want is to have as many iterations as you can do to just keep improving on that content. So the tools you're looking for then should support being able to first implement content or systems quickly, but then also being able to test it quickly, because then you can have a fast turnaround of your iteration, which gives you more time to do more iterations and thereby creating better content and better systems. Most of the tools that I worked on as a quest designer was the quest editor and the dialogue editor. Of course, I worked a lot in Word, documenting the quests. That's usually the start of the process of creating a quest. You write a document describing what the quest is, and it's written like a walkthrough. So it states where it's taking place, who gives you the quest, what will the quest giver convey to you, what are the different steps that the player will go through to complete this quest, what's the journey they go through. And then we implement the quest logic inside a quest editor. And the quest editor, it was a really, really great tool. It's basically like a flowchart editor, where each box in the flowchart was a part of the quest. So you could just create another box and say, it's this type of objective. It's kill an NPC, kill an AI. It's pick up an item or give an item to a character, let's say. And then you could just specify which character and which items it was, and add the text field for what will the journal say that this objective is about, let's say. So it was really fast and very simple to work with, and produced very stable content. Also had of course, the dialogue editor, and the dialogue was written by a writer. So the quest designers usually didn't write the dialogue. We had really good writers to do that for us. So in a sense, you could almost say that the quest designers were more like narrative designers rather than quest designers. Rather than writers. Okay, so by the way, this is it's still a game I'm really proud of. It's still online if you want to check it out. So what does it mean then to be creating worlds as a quest designer? Well, of course, you're a storyteller and you actually tell the story of the world, but primarily for me, it's this. The job is to make the world come alive by framing the content of the game as story. So video games are at its core rather repetitive, right? The designer creates a core loop, a core gameplay loop that you ask the player to repeat and repeat and repeat over many, many hours. So then you try to meet that by making the content interesting. You try to kind of hide how repetitive the core loop is. So you do it by creating variety in the level design. You do it by introducing new enemy types or new gameplay challenges. You do it by raising the difficulty level. or by introducing new weapons and new abilities for the player. But you also do it by taking sections of the content of the game and putting a narrative wrapper around it and presenting that as a story, and use that to build up the world and what's happening in the world and the culture of the world. Jumping ahead from 2004 to 2010, I moved back to Sweden and joined the studio MachineGames to work on something very different, a first-person shooter called Wolfenstein: The New Order. The game and the genre was very different, but so was my role. I joined as a senior gameplay designer. Let's have a quick look at the launch trailer for the game.
Peggy 18.
Es gibt ein Haus in Neu-Berlin, man nennt es Haus Abendrot. Es war der Ruin vieler guter Jungs, von mir, mein Gott, litt ich Not.
Fuck me. B.J. Blazkowicz.
Caroline, you're alive.
If you call shitting in a bag living, 3 pulverized vertebrae. You?
Head trauma, 4 inches of cast iron shrapnel right in the conch. Still in there.
Severed colon, septic shock, shattered pelvis.
Memory loss, flashbacks, 14 years in a loony bin.
Good to see you, William. Friends and comrades, this is it.
The Nazis stole our secrets. They used them to win the war. Everything they have accomplished was built upon our knowledge.
They think the war's over. That we are weak, beaten. Don't have the guts to oppose them. And as always, they are wrong.
Captain Blazkowicz, still fighting after all these years.
I'm on this. With you. Always.
In the end, we will be judged, not by what we have destroyed, but what we have created.
What the fuck did I just do?
Mayhem and destruction like what you always do. It's just you doing you.
Wake up. You're dead.
Dass sie mir nicht nachrennt, vermeiden das Haus in Neu-Berlin, das Haus Abendrot.
What have you been up to, Blazkowicz?
Shooting, stabbing, strangling Nazis.
Meine Mutter war eine Schneiderin, verkaufte diese Uniform.
Blazkowicz, what's your status?
Well, I'm on the motherfucking moon.
Okay, it's pretty violent, that game. So what did I do then as a gameplay designer? Well, I was a scripter. I scripted the levels, some of the levels I was responsible for, using a visual scripting tool. That meant that, I was responsible for implementing combat, and that means just placing combat AIs, the AI entities into the world, and placing the logic that would dictate what they would do and what options the AI would have. Any sort of interactivity, like if a door is going to open or close, that was scripted by me. If the player could pull a lever, that was also me. All those sort of interactive stuff. Events, animated events. If a character shows up and does something, a car drives down the road, anything like that, that was also implemented by me, working together with the animators and the artists who animated the events and created the art assets. If there were checkpoints to save your progress, that's implemented by me. So to do this, we had a visual scripting language that was part of idTech, and idTech is the game engine that comes from id Software, right? id, the studio that did Wolfenstein 3D back in the 90s and have done Quake and Doom and all sorts of great games. So their engine is idTech, and we're part of the same family of studios through the Bethesda sphere as id is. So we have access to that engine, and we work on the engine together with id, continuing the development of the engine. So back then, the visual scripting was, today I guess we could see it as kind of old school, but the visual scripting of that generation of the engine was simply placing logic nodes or logic boxes inside the level itself. So I could tie let's say a trigger and have the trigger that the player steps into and have that fire a logic box inside the level, and that box then, maybe it was a checkpoint save, or maybe it was telling some other object to animate with a certain animation or something like that. So it all took place inside the level, which made it quite easy to work with. But if you have something of the complexity that Wolfenstein: The New Order was, it could get pretty massive pretty quickly, because it was difficult to organize all those colorful boxes inside the level in the editor. Today we have a visual scripting that is much more sophisticated and more like the scripting you can find in an engine like Unreal. But that was my main tool. There's a data editor that's part of idTech, where you edit. You have a UI for editing values of data, like how many health points does this enemy have. Let's create a new version of that enemy by creating a copy of it, and then I can change the health or the armor or how quickly it detects a player, all those sort of things. So this was quite different from being a quest designer, right? You could say that it was less creative in the choices I had in what would happen in the game world. And my creativity was more in how do I choose to solve this technically? Because my job wasn't to invent what the level should be. My job was to take a walkthrough that has been written for what's going to happen in this level, and then try to implement it in the greatest way I can, together with a team of artists and animators and audio people. So creating worlds as the gameplay designer for me meant trying to present as rich a world as you possibly can through the highest quality execution. I tried to, in my scripting, just make the best job I could in trying to make this immersive and believable and exciting. All right, that was the New Order. After the New Order, we built a game called Wolfenstein: The Old Blood, which was this. It's a shorter game and a simpler game because it reused a lot of stuff from the New Order. So while we were finishing that game up, some of us started working on Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, the big sequel to the New Order. And here my role changed from gameplay designer to game designer, meaning I had responsibility for parts of the game's general design. Let's have a quick look at the trailer for that game.
Welcome back to America's #1 game show.
My brothers and sisters of the United States of America, tonight, we, the free people of the resistance, ask you to become one of us. Did you forget? They beat us. They murdered us. They executed us. But guess what? They fucked with the wrong country.
Come and fucking get me, you fascist Nazi pig.
see you on the streets with a knife, or just your clenched fist fighting the powers that be, then you are one of us. Tonight, they burn.
Okay. Oops, let's see. Yeah, so looking at my preview window on my second screen here, it looks quite choppy, the video, but I'm not sure how it looks for you. Anyway, short summary, it's awesome. So my job then on Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus as the game designer was, and I was lucky to join the project before most people. We were just a few people working on the title when I started working on it. So I kind of left Old Blood and worked on this. So because I was early, I had the chance to be part of defining the game's pillars. And the game pillars are, well, it's the core of the game, it's the heart of the game, it's the tenets that dictate what this game is and how it's different, right? So that's always something you want to do once you start working on a new game. You want to find out what are the game pillars, you want to define that. And you keep those pillars with you, and you make sure that everyone has them in the back of their head, in their mind, throughout the project, from early pre-production and to the very end, so that every time you're going to make a creative choice or a creative decision, you have the game pillars in the back of your head, right? So as a game designer, I worked on designing features and systems and some enemies. That to try to summarize what that means is, I worked on finding out designs for the different features and enemies. I collected feedback to improve the designs. Then I worked with the stakeholders, the different professions that were actually going to build these systems, these enemies. One thing I do want to say about being a game designer that's really important is to remember you're not the king. Just because you kind of own a design doesn't mean that you can just do whatever you want and just tell people to do as you say. It's actually very important to involve the stakeholders, the people that are going to be working on, let's say, an enemy, to get them involved early. And there are a couple of reasons why you want to do that. First is you want to make sure you get their buy-in. You want to make sure they're on board, that they believe in it, that they want to build that. Because if they don't want to build it, if they don't believe in what you're talking about, you're going to have a very difficult time actually producing anything of value. The second reason is, well, they're the stakeholders. They are the experts in their fields. Yes, you are the game designer, but the animator is the expert animator. The AI programmer is the expert on AI. So you want to talk to them to get their feedback, so you can get their insight in how you're wrong. Because whenever you do something that is sufficiently complex, you're probably going to have made a few assumptions that are going to be wrong. So the experts in this field can help you realize where you're wrong, and you can already, when you're on the when it's just a paper design, you can already then start to fix the problems that they see with it. Another reason is, because of them being experts and having insights into their own fields and, let's say, their own systems and code base, they can provide you with ideas and ways to do things that you haven't thought of, because you don't have that insight into their systems or their tools. So they will help you actually make a better design. So yeah, you make a paper design, then you make a prototype of it, of the design or of the enemy or whatever it is, And then you test that prototype and discover more ways that you've been wrong, because you're going to be wrong and you're going to find ways to do it better. And you spend the time just iterating on the prototype of the system, of the feature, of the enemy. And then once you feel confident that this is actually really great on a prototype stage, then you do the real implementation with real art assets, with real solid engineering. So at this point in my journey through the games industry and in this role, I had kind of moved away a little bit from working a lot with kind of the tech itself, getting my hands dirty in the tools. There was still some of that, absolutely, but at this point, probably my most used tool, the most important tool, was my own voice, just talking to people, trying to get buy-in, trying to get feedback, trying to explain what we were trying to do, trying to help people make the right calls. And I use Word a lot as a game designer, of course, just documenting designs, documenting information that the studio needs. PowerPoint is a common tool as well to present designs within the game design team, to my director, to the stakeholders that are going to build something, and to everyone in the studio to make sure they are informed. Excel is, of course, a very important tool as well, in terms of creating sheets for trying to find the balance between weapons or systems, or just as a tool to convey information and sort information. Something I definitely can recommend is to use a good wiki system to document and present information, because it's really, it's just a very powerful tool to kind of split up information and have information be easily accessed, easily updated, and not ask your dev team to read a game design document that is 100 pages long. Game design documents, no one reads those, so a wiki solution is much better, and we have been using Confluence for that. Something else I did a lot of is using the data editor in IdTech to tweak enemies, tweak values that controls the behavior of enemies or systems. One thing I don't think I've said yet is IdTech as a game engine is kind of the opposite of the game engine we had at Funcom. The Funcom game engine was very specific in the way that it was built to do a very specific type of game. And IdTech has kind of the opposite philosophy. Yeah, it's a great engine for doing shooters, of course, but you can do pretty much any game with it. It's built to be modular. It's built to be a simple to add and remove features from. It's supposed to be, it's built to be modular and to be able to power a wide range of games. It doesn't have a huge feature set that kind of suggests you need to make a game like this in this way. Okay, so then what does it mean to be creating worlds as a game designer? To me, it means to let the player participate in telling the story of the world by giving them verbs. So you want to include the player as a storyteller, right? And you give them verbs, and verbs are what the player can do in the world. They can jump through a window, they can shoot and reload a weapon, they can pull a lever, they can choose to talk to a character and make a decision in a dialogue system, let's say. So to me, that's one of the coolest things about being a game designer, arming the player with verbs so they can participate in the storytelling. Okay, so my current role is lead designer on an unannounced project, and I can't even talk about what genre it is, so I don't have a trailer for you. And it has nothing to do with grass, even though I have grass on the picture. That was just a picture I had on my phone, so oh well. So what does it mean to be a lead designer at MachineGames? Well, one thing I can tell you is that there are no real standards in the game industry about these titles. What a title means in one studio can mean something quite differently in a different studio. So when I'm talking about all these different roles, it's my experience, and it's what the roles have meant in the studios I worked at. So as a lead designer, a big part of the job has been to take kind of the skeleton vision you get from the game director, that I got from the game director, and try to translate that into a game, translate that into design direction. What is the gameplay experience going to be? And then I work with two design teams. You have the game design team, the people who are building, like I've been talking about, the features and system and enemies. And then you have the level design team, the people who are making the content, making the levels and what's actually happening in the game. So my job is to try to lead them to understand the design direction, understand the design direction, and make the right choices when they, let's say, work on a part of a level or trying to create an enemy or a feature. And the way I try to do that is not by telling them what I think is the right choice for them to make. What I try to, as I said, communicate as clearly as I can what the vision and direction for the gameplay experience should be, and then give them goals that their designs and their work needs to strive to achieve, so that they can try to realize the vision in their own way. So that's a big part of the job, to be honest. Just communicating. It's a lot of communicating at this point. So in terms of tech, I'm even further away from actually getting my hands dirty. I would love to actually do that more, to do scripting. I just don't have time for it. A lot of my days are now spent on talking to people, helping out in planning, and reviewing design work and feedbacking on design work. Something else I'm spending a lot of time on is, and want to spend more time on than I had the chance to do right now, is communicating the gameplay direction to the studio, so that everyone understands the context that they're working in. Where are we going? What are we trying to achieve here, and why? And my tools, I guess, are rather similar to what I've done as a game designer. You have Microsoft Word, you have PowerPoint, Excel, and the Confluence wiki that we use. So finally, as a lead designer, what does it mean to be creating worlds for me? I try to define and advocate a gameplay identity to shape the style of player stories. So part of figuring out what the gameplay should be is figuring out what is the possibility space. What do we allow the player to do in this world, and what is the style that the player will do it with? So I think that's pretty much what it means in terms of creating worlds. So throughout all these roles, I've certainly felt like I continue to focus on the world creation. There's so much more to these roles than creating worlds, but for me, that's been the red thread. All right, I think I just have 6 minutes left, so maybe we have some questions that we have time for.
Hello, Andreas. Thank you for the amazing talk.
Hello, thanks.
I'll be taking questions right now. We have a few. So Pedro Ribeiro asked, question, how did Youngblood's co-op emphasis change the way you went about quest and game design compared to the Wolfenstein trilogy? Do you have any regrets regarding that game? Thank you.
So I actually think Youngblood it has probably the greatest gameplay we've ever done. I think we managed to do some really great stuff with that game, but it's not a game without its problems. I think part of why we got mixed feedback on Youngblood among some people was because I think maybe we talked about the game wrong. We marketed wrong. To us, it was one of those in-between games, like the Old Blood was. It wasn't one of the big titles, but I think we kind of marked it a little bit like this was the next big Wolfenstein from us. But this was a cheaper, shorter game. Yeah, but I have a lot of fun when I'm playing it. I think the biggest change for us in doing co-op, which we hadn't done before, was trying to adapt the systems and the enemies to work with 2 players. And also to kind of take a step back and let the players, give the players room to kind of tell the story together, rather than having this kind of firm narrative hand that we usually have on the player's shoulder.
All right. There's another question from Gabriel Oliveira. Is it common to change roles in different titles?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy doing different things. I get bored, so throughout my journey through the gaming world, I've had a bunch of different roles. I didn't even talk about being assistant producer, which I did for a while at MachineGames. Yeah, I think it's different in different studios how easily it is to change roles. At MachineGames, it is easy. I've changed my role multiple times, and I've seen a lot of other people be able to do it. Even moving between kind of from design to art and that sort of change. But it's very much up to the studio and the studio culture if they think that's a good idea or not. MachineGames is a studio that has a team with people who have been. A lot of the people at MachineGames have worked there for a very, very long time. So a lot of people want to stay at MachineGames. So rather than leaving MachineGames to do something different, taking on a different role in a new studio, MachineGames usually find space for you to try something else. And if that doesn't really work out for you, if this isn't really something that you were good at or want to do, then usually you can just kind of move back into your old position.
All right. Because it was a pretty big change, right, for you. I noticed that you kind of leapt from quest design to lead designer. Was that a big jump for you? Did you skip over something in the middle there?
No, so from quest designer to a gameplay designer, and of course you get the title senior, which might not mean that much. It's just your hair is starting to turn gray.
All right.
So that was the move from Funcom to MachineGames, quest designer to scripter, and I actually had more of an influence and effect on the game I was working on as a quest designer, which was my first job, than I had as a gameplay designer / scripter later on. And then as I changed roles again within MachineGames, again I had more of an influence on the game as a game designer than lead.
All right. Well, everyone, there's no more time for questions right now, but there will be a Q&A session. One of my colleagues will post a link in the chat. All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.